How do you make a good tarot spread? For me personally, tarot spreads are a non-negotiable part of my practice. I do know that some tarot readers don't use spreads at all and they just kind of like willy-nilly throw some cards out there and rely on their intuition. But to me, I hate that method. It's not accurate, it's not specific, it's not defined, it's not structural. And when I see tarot readers just randomly pulling out cards until they feel like they have an answer, to me, the answers that I get are very weak. They're very weak. And I know it's not like cool to criticize others or whatever, but this is just my personal take. I intentionally use spreads, and I also explain to the client what spread I'm using before I pull the cards, so they know how I'm approaching the answer to their question. So spreads are not only helpful for you as a tarot reader to be more specific, more clear, more structured, more dynamic in the answer, but it also helps communicate to the person that you're reading for what it is that you're looking to answer for them. Because they might have a different concept of a solution in their mind than you do. And if you're pulling cards thinking that you're interpreting their question one way and they're communicating something else, how are you gonna know? How are you gonna know unless you tell them? So yeah, spreads I'm a huge fan of. They're not negotiable, right? If you're gonna come to a reading with me, I'm gonna use spreads. And I'm typically not impressed of tarot readers who don't use spreads. And I know that that's pretty critical of me, but that's just my personal experience. So I have a lot to say about tarot spreads because it is the kind of power wheelhouse of my tarot practice. And when I was first learning tarot, I had no idea how to craft a good tarot spread. And I actually bought like several books and I tried different spreads from other people. And I tried, popular spreads like the Celtic Cross and all of these stuff, past, present, future. And a lot of them I found deeply lacking, deeply frustrating, or they had severe deficiencies in the way and the scope that they could answer questions. So through trial and error, through using spreads, I realized that a lot of spreads out there are actually very bad. Even like the books that I bought, like published books that recommended, like if you have this problem, use this spread, a lot of them were very weak. Weak in my evaluation at least. So I mentioned this before, but I went to school for engineering, right? And when you train as an engineer, it's not necessarily like math and calculus, but they train you to approach problem solving a very specific way. Engineering school teaches you how to solve problems using like strategic analysis, using systems, using concepts. How do we take something big and complicated and we break it down into like specific solutionable parts? And there's a lot of overlap between tarot reading and engineering in that way. As an engineer, I was attracted to engineering because I like solving problems. I like coming up with innovative solutions. Tarot is the exact same. It's the same. It's just the problems and the solutions that we're generating are different. They're on the spiritual level or the emotional level or, destiny, whereas engineering is just very practical. But a very well-structured spread takes after me, like how I interpret it, takes after the engineering model of how you approach like logical problem-solving sequences. A spread is not a solution in itself. A spread is a systematic framework to uncover variables, obstacles, potential paths, and to reveal a process for solution making. I know that sounds kind of like big words or something like that, it's complex. But for me, a spread is a structural framework, right? So we're taking something complex and we're creating basically like a diagnostic framework on how to attack a specific problem or develop a specific process. And you do the same thing in engineering. So, it's like systems engineering, but in a spiritual context. And when I started committing myself to using spreads with the same analytical rigor as I did my engineering, my accuracy, the value of reading, the powerful impact that my tarot readings would generate went through the roof. It went way higher. I was able to help many more clients in many more meaningful ways. They were actually coming to a session getting, powerful advice, powerful insight, transformative healing. And part of it was, of course, asking the right questions, but developing the right solutions to answer those questions, to answer the needs of my client. Once I started approaching tarot like an engineer, my tarot readings got way better. And you can't do that if you don't use a spread. So strong tarot spreads, they are like structured problem-solving models, right? So they're a framework, they're a diagnostic framework. Depending on what the problem is how we would develop that diagnostic model. So, step one, of course, is defining the questions, right? We can't develop solutions if we don't know what it is that we're asking. So I made another video about, common mistakes is a lot of tarot readers ask bad questions. And if your question is poor, your answers are going to be poor, no matter how gifted you are. So number one is having a good question. It's actionable, it's specific, it's defined. It empowers the client, so many things. Step two in developing a good spread is developing what are my key variables. Now, one of the things that I found disappointing when I was reading some of my tarot books on spreads is they didn't pick very good variables. They would pick hidden obstacles or hidden influences. What are my hidden influences? What is my subconscious? And I'd be like, okay, hidden influences, hidden obstacles, subconscious, those are all well and dandy, but does it directly attack the question at hand that we're trying to answer? And I think this is where a lot of popular spreads fall short, where they develop weaknesses, is just like our question has to be specific and meaningful and impactful. Every single card that you pull in a spread has to serve a purpose, right? So, what's the point of revealing hidden influences if you're, if that doesn't have a direct influence on what it is that you're trying to answer? And moreover, it's not specific at all. A hidden influence could be like the solar system. It could be the economy. It could be the weather. It could be, someone feeling sick that day. Does that have a direct outcome on what it is that you're trying to understand or solve, right? And that scope. What exactly is this hidden influence that you're trying to define? Be more specific, be more direct, be more strategic, be more analytical, be more critical in the cards that you craft for your spread. Don't say, what are my hidden influences? It's too vague. Be more specific or be more, inquisitive. If you don't know, then ask tarot. If you don't know, then start to pull cards to say, okay, there's some blind spots that I have. I'm not able to develop a spread that's fully actualized and solution making yet. So I'm going to pull some cards to see what I should be looking at. This is another tactic that I use a lot, especially with spiritual healing. If someone comes to me and they are experiencing, levels of pain or distress, I might not know what areas of pain or distress for us to work through first, right? Or I might not fully know the way that their pain or distress is being expressed. So I will ask tarot. I will shuffle the cards and I will say, what are the top 3 things that I need to be focusing on with this client? What are the top 3 areas that I need to drill down into? And, I'll shuffle the cards and, okay, I just pulled this card, death, right? So maybe the person has experienced loss or grief or death or mortality. Maybe they're suffering from something. The next card we have is Ace of Cups, which would be their emotions. Their emotions might not be regulated. They might have, emotional outbursts. And then Two of Wands, this is about planning their future. So if I were to put all three of those cards together, someone was in distress and pain, I'd say, okay, let's now develop a spread focusing and drilling down into these three archetypes to help attack your problem or focus on your specific needs: death, emotions, and future plans. It varies with every person, but you need to have a spread. You need to have an intention if you're going to be like a surgeon with an X-Acto knife, cutting in to get something specific. We want to have the scalpel and not the chainsaw. And you can't do that if you don't have spreads. Tarot spreads have to be directly related to the client that you're working with, whatever their problem is, whatever is specific to them. And then, like a good engineer, you want to develop a full systematic framework, right? So a diagnostic framework is a system. When we think of solutions, solutions are not just 1 + 1 = 2. When you think of solutions as a framework, as a diagnostic framework, you start to see that this is a whole component. There are obstacles, there are challenges, there are timelines, there are things that are within the scope of control, things outside our scope of control. These are all the aspects that you want to analyze in your spread in a way that's meaningful to the question at hand. And you want it to be logical. So I will pull, when I'm working with a client, depending on how complex their situation is or their question is, I will pull lots of cards. I will pull many cards, and I'll pull pros and cons, we'll pull challenges, I'll pull advice. It varies depending on what it is at hand, but I will sit there and listen to them. I'll have an interview process, understand their question, craft a very good question, and then I will develop a strategic approach to developing a systematic framework to answer that. It's not just it's typically not as simple as hey, I like person 1 and I like person 2. Who is the best person for me, right? To an average person, that seems like a pretty simple question. And most unsophisticated tarot readers will just be okay, I'll pull 2 cards. Here's for person 1, here's for person 2. And maybe that works for them, but to me, I don't find that very meaningful. I'm not in the business of just preaching to my client. I want them to come to their own plateau of wisdom, their own realizations. And part of that is allowing people to use the cards and archetype, to use the framework of a spread, to apply their own logic, to apply their own critical thinking when it comes to solving problems in their life. So let's just say there's a client and they have 2 love interests and they want to know who's the best interest for them to date, right? It's not that clear cut. We'll pull on the relationship dynamics. We'll pull to see, what are your long-term goals in this relationship? What are you wanting to achieve? Is this a one-night stand thing, or are you looking to get married? What are their strengths and weaknesses with each person? What are your needs in the relationship? Where do you still need to grow and develop? These 2 people are not the only people on the planet. Are there potentially other options that you're not considering? Are there any red flags that you've been ignoring? Again, we will go into detail, look at the problem, not just as a simple 1 + 1 = 2 solution, but look at the picture holistically. Look at it from a whole standpoint. Because when we actually make meaningful decisions in our lives, it's not just 1 + 1 = 2. It's usually a combination, a fluid system of many factors that influence us. And tarot can be a fascinating and very powerful tool to identifying these concepts, working through solutions on these concepts, and having the client just practice critical thinking skills as we are getting answers and wisdom and insight from tarot. It is much more than just, hey, who should I date? Pull a card. It's so much more than that, because at the end of the day, you want your client to be empowered. You want them to come up with the solutions in their life. You want them to develop the critical thinking skills, or be empowered to heal themselves, or find their purpose, or unveil the things in their life that they need to work through. You can't do that if you don't teach them how to think, if we're not thinking together. So yeah, spreads are non-negotiable in my practice. I think that if we don't use spreads, then we also open ourselves up to internal bias, right? We can be fooled. We can fool ourselves. Using a spread, in order to use a spread, you first have to use your brain first. We first have to analyze the problem, develop strategic solutions, approach the subject from a holistic view and not a superficial view. And even just the exercise of developing a spread, using those engineering mindsets, using a structural framework is hugely beneficial for people. Hugely beneficial, like regardless of the cards that I pull. Just simply coaching the client on how to think about their problem in a systematic way, in a framework way, in the way that an engineer would, already does half the problem solving for them. And then when we finally pull the cards, it's like, now we have the cherry on top. Now we're finally getting powerful results because I've engaged the client's mind to start to think about their problem in an analytical way. And so now they're active. They're active in their own life. They're active in their own problem solving. And then when we pull the cards, because now their mind has been primed and activated, now they look at the card and they can project whatever solution or wisdom or intuitive insight that they needed to hear. And it comes through so much more clearly, way more powerful. So spreads aren't just about making sure that you answer the question in a holistic, accurate way. It's also about giving your client resources for them to activate their critical thinking skills, to activate their own wisdom, their own insight, their own analytical approach to their problem. And the thing is like, it doesn't have to be with the problem, it doesn't have to be spiritual. It can be very practical, right? But the approach to systematic thinking still needs to be with both, whether you're conveying spiritual topics or you're trying to do practical solutions in your life. Like, what is my career? What is my purpose? How do I find true love? All of those things, even though they're very varied and they have very different topics, you need to still approach them as a holistic, strategic framework, and you need to apply your own mind. And tarot is very, very good at giving people instructions, at telling people what to do. And you want the person to be already critically thinking, already critically engaged in the reading, so that when you make these suggestions, when you say, hey, tarot is telling me this, or tarot is suggesting that you do this, that the person is already, like, whether they know it or not, they're already tapping into their own intuitive powers to develop their own solutions or to change their psyche in order to achieve the solutions that you're asking them. So spreads increase efficiency. They engage your client on a deeper level. They reduce the likelihood of bias or failure. They increase your accuracy, and they just make your reading way more clear, way more structured, I mean, everything. I could talk about spreads for days. But yeah, I mean, in my personal experience, I have gone to readers who don't use spreads, and I've never truly been impressed. You always kind of feel like they're just like making it up. Like they're just like, I'm just gonna keep on pulling some cards until I know what to tell you. That's how I feel when I go to a tarot reader and they don't use a spread. I'm like, do you even know what you're doing? Like, you know, and you're not even engaging me as a client. You're just like, pulling cards with some mystic. I don't know. Let me know. Let me know if you think I'm wrong. Am I being too critical or too harsh here? I have never been impressed by tarot readers who don't use spreads. I think that they're missing out on huge potential. And as a client, when I've gone to get readings, because I love to get readings too, the difference between when someone has a very well-crafted, specific, directed, comprehensive spread, I'm like, my jaw's on the floor. I'm like, wow, that reading blew me away. Like, I came here with a question. They gave me not only answers, advice, and wisdom, but like they went deep, right? That's what I feel like spreads do. And if you don't have a spread, you're not really gonna go that deep. You're gonna go superficial. It's gonna be weak. I'm just gonna say it. It's gonna be weak. In my experience, the weakest readers have just been the ones that just like pull cards until they feel like they've pulled enough, and they just too fruity for me. I'm sorry, too fruity. I like to have spreads. I like to have a framework. I like to engage the mind of the client and the intuitive, critical thinking skills of my client as we are reading together, as we're going through this session together, because two heads are better than one. And I want my client to be actively, intuitively, spiritually engaged in the reading, because at the end of the day, they have to come up with their own solutions. They have to come up with their own power in their life. And so they need to be part of the reading. And spreads are a great way to guide their critical thinking skills in the reading, even if it's a complex problem. And this is also why it's so easy for my sessions to get to be an hour long, because the little engineer in me, once we start analyzing a problem, then we start to realize how complex it is. And most people very naively think that their problems are not complex, or that the factors or the variables or the influences that they're considering, they, haven't even considered yet. And tarot can be so powerful that way. Like, literally, people's minds get blown as you walk them through how to think. It's very, very cool. I have a lot more that I could say about spreads. I think it would be better if I wrote it down, because talking in a video is kind of hard to talk about spreads. But I think, let me know if you guys are even interested in this topic, by the way. I definitely have some spreads that I've developed for people and certain situations. If you want me to share these spreads, or if you want me to focus more on how to develop the systems engineering mindset on how to approach problem solving as a structural framework process, that kind of thing, for diagnostic, let me know. I know it's a lot of engineering buzzwords. I didn't expect this video to be like that, but that is exactly how I approach it, and that's how I've seen the most success in over a decade of reading for clients. All right, take care, everyone. Bye. Oh, it's so funny. The card at the bottom of the deck, Queen of Swords. This is so me, okay? I have Queen of Swords energy when I do tarot spreads, so yeah, I love it when tarot does that. Anyway, bye.